if you look at the Earth from space, it is, it's basically a giant glowing blue marble.
Yeah, entirely defined by its oceans and clouds.
Exactly. And if you look at the human body, like your body right now, listening to this deep dive, it is essentially a walking vessel that is 70% water.
Right.
We are surrounded by it. We are fundamentally made of it. And yet, humanity is currently on the brink of a catastrophic global water crisis.
We are quite literally drying out.
We are.
It is the ultimate irony of the modern age, really. I mean, we have mapped the human genome, we've split the atom, but we are completely failing to manage the single most foundational element required to keep our biological machinery running.
Which brings us to our mission today. We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly unique presentation from Trasta ESG.
Titled Shirler Dessous.
Right, which translates to water in poetry. And I'll be completely honest with you, when I first looked at these notes, I was highly skeptical.
Oh, I don't blame you.
I mean, I found myself wondering, how is a 500-year-old classical poem about, like, a lover's tears going to help us fix a failing 21st century infrastructure grid?
Yeah, it feels a bit disconnected.
It felt like bringing a lute to a knife fight.
I love that.
Yeah.
But it's a completely fair reaction. We're conditioned to think of classical literature, especially the rich traditions of Turkish, Arabic, and Persian poetry, as a purely aesthetic experience,
Right, like fragile art sitting behind a metaphorical glass case.
Exactly. We don't view it as a diagnostic tool for modern resource management, but that is exactly the bridge this research builds.
Okay, so how does it do that?
Well, it argues that the way these ancient poets wrote about water isn't just pretty language. It actually reveals the psychological blueprint of how humanity values its most precious resource.
Wow.
Yeah, it diagnoses the exact disconnect that led to our current crisis.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because once you get past that initial skepticism, the sheer volume of concepts that water symbolized in these classical texts is, it's staggering.
It really is. It wasn't just a background element.
No, it was the entire philosophical framework. They used water to symbolize everything from the rigid structures of justice and societal rules to the fluid dynamics of love and reunion.
Right.
They used it as a metaphor for a sword, for poetry itself, for the act of repentance, and for the very concept of life.
And what we really need to look at is how they conveyed these meanings. In English, we often just use the generic word water.
Yeah, just the one word.
But in these classical traditions, they relied on incredibly specific forms to evoke precise emotional and physical states.
Oh,
They
interesting.
didn't just write water. They wrote about the slow erosion of a river, the unfathomable depth of the sea, the sudden violence of a flood.
So they were capturing the behavior of it.
Exactly. They invoked Kevser, which is the mythical river in paradise, alongside Sebel, the very real public fountains where everyday citizens gathered.
They were pulling from both the divine and the mundane.
Right. They drew parallels between the microscopic intimacy of a teardrop and the gushing force of a horror. Yeah, a powerful natural spring.
I love that word. I want to stop on one of those metaphors, though, because it really threw me at first. A sword. How do you get from a fluid, life-giving substance to a weapon of war?
It's all about the underlying mechanics. Think about how a blade is forged.
Okay.
The blacksmith uses water to temper the steel, locking in its strength. But more than that, it's about the movement.
The swing of it.
Right. A master swordsman's strike isn't rigid. It flows. It finds the path of least resistance, just like a river, but with devastating, unstoppable force.
Oh, wow.
So water in this poetry isn't just passive and peaceful. It is an active, dynamic power.
That actually makes a lot of sense. But the research goes even further than that, right? Straight to the origins of the universe.
It does.
It explicitly links water to the genesis of all things. Which leads me to ask, how does water physically connect to something as massive and abstract as the creation of the human soul?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the mechanics of Sufi philosophy. That's the engine driving a lot of this classical poetry. In this worldview, love isn't just an emotion you feel for someone else.
Right.
Love is the literal active will of God that gives physical form to existence. It is the creative force of the universe.
So if love is the creative force, the energy, what role does the water play? Is it just like the canvas?
No, it's the binding agent. The philosophical tradition describes the creation of humanity in deeply physical terms. It says that God literally kneaded the dough of human bodies and souls using the water of love.
Oh, the dough. I see.
Yeah, think about the mechanics of baking. Flour alone is just dry dust. It scatters in the wind.
Has no structure.
Exactly. No cohesion, no life. But when you add water, you activate the proteins. You create gluten.
You bind the dust together.
Right. Into a cohesive living dough that can rise and transform.
That is such a vivid mechanism. You aren't just splashing water on something. You are fundamentally altering its chemistry through fermentation and kneading. There are some specific lines in the research that capture this perfectly. One poet writes that because the soil of the soul is fermented with the water of love, the soul is rendered a captive to the lover.
Exactly. The fermentation process implies time, transformation, and a fundamental change in state.
It's a profound way of saying that we are biologically and spiritually built to connect.
Right. Our very composition requires it, otherwise we just turn back into dust.
And there's another fascinating angle here regarding purification, too.
Oh, washing away the dirt.
Yeah, the poetry talks about washing away the dirt of worldly attachments with this water of love. The idea is that existence itself brings a burning pain, the friction of living, and water is the only soothing element.
It takes us back to our purest state.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a rather breathtaking realization, I think. These ancient poets, sitting in the 15th and 16th centuries, intuitively understood something about our composition through pure philosophical deduction.
Something that modern science has only recently proven with hard clinical data.
Is it?
And this is where our deep dive transitions from the spiritual dough of Sufism to literal biological reality.
The physical data.
Right. The poets claimed our souls were molded by water. Modern biology tells us that our physical machinery operates on the exact same principle. We are, quite literally, animated bodies of water walking across that blue marble we mentioned earlier.
The biological breakdown is extraordinary when you look at the cellular level.
It really is.
Consider the brain. The organ that allows you to process the complex metaphors we're discussing right now is 75% water.
75%.
Yeah, it requires that fluid environment to conduct the electrical impulses between neurons. Without it, the signaling simply halts.
And it's not just the soft tissues either, it's the infrastructure of the body. Your blood, the transport system keeping you alive second by second, is 90% water.
Incredible.
Your skin, the barrier protecting you from the elements, is 30%. Even your joints and cartilage, the shock absorbers that allow you to stand up and walk across a room, are 80% water.
Oh.
The synovial fluid in your knees is basically just a specialized water cushion.
We think of ourselves as solid beings, but we are essentially pressurized, highly organized bags of seawater.
Bags of seawater. I love that. But that brings us to the terrifying caveat in the data, and this is the part that genuinely gave me pause.
Yeah, it's sobering.
We are made of water. We live on a planet covered in it, but we cannot actually use the vast majority of it to survive.
Right.
According to the data, 96.5% of the water on Earth is salty.
It is in the oceans and seas.
If you drink it, the salinity will shut down your kidneys and kill you. It is useless for drinking, and it is useless for agriculture because it will salt the earth and destroy crops.
Leaving us with just 3.5% as fresh water.
Which sounds small, but even that number is deceptively high, right?
Oh, absolutely. A massive portion of that 3.5% is locked away in glaciers, ice caps, and deep, inaccessible underground aquifers.
Right.
The actual surface water in rivers and lakes that is accessible to humanity is a fraction of a percent.
We are literally dying of thirst in an ocean. It reminds me of the concept of breathing air. We never think about the value of oxygen when we're walking down the street.
It's just there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We only realize its infinite value when we are 50 feet underwater with a failing scuba tank.
That is a perfect analogy for what economists call the water diamond paradox.
The water diamond paradox.
Yeah, which the research frames as the psychological root of our modern crisis.
Yeah.
It was originally posed by Adam Smith in the 1700s.
Right, the economics guy.
Exactly. He looked at human behavior and noticed a massive contradiction in how we assign value.
Right, because diamonds are incredibly scarce, so they have an astronomically high market value, but their actual practical utility is very low.
You can't eat a diamond.
No, you can't drink a diamond. It won't keep you warm.
Exactly. Water, conversely, has the highest possible utility. Without it, you die in about 3 days.
Yeah.
But because it has historically had high availability, at least in the developed world, we assign it almost zero economic value.
And there's a term for that, right?
Yeah, marginal utility.
Hmm.
The first cup of water you drink in a desert is worth everything you own.
Right.
The 10,000th cup you use to pressure wash your driveway has almost zero marginal utility to you.
That makes total sense.
Modern society has built its entire infrastructure, its agriculture, and its daily habits on the assumption that we will always have access to that 10,000th cup.
Right. We pay pennies for it. We leave the tap running. We pollute rivers without a second thought.
Because the handle turns and the water flows.
But the research asks a chilling question. What happens when the biological necessity of water collides with the artificial scarcity we are actively creating?
What happens when the water diamond paradox flips?
Exactly.
That is the precipice we are standing on today. When we look at the historical data mapping global water usage, the trend line since the start of the 20th century doesn't gently slope upward.
It violently skyrockets.
We're looking at a near vertical increase, driven by exponential population growth, the demands of the Industrial Revolution, intense technological manufacturing, and incredibly reckless consumption habits.
And the 2040 projected water stress maps included in this research paint a really grim picture.
They do.
If you visualize a map of the world, we aren't just talking about deserts getting drier. We are talking about massive, heavily populated swaths of the globe, major economic centers covered in dark red, indicating extreme systemic water stress.
We're talking about failing crops, collapsing sanitation, and rolling water blackouts.
And this cascades into every other global threat. When risk analysts look at the top global threats over a 10-year horizon, the top three are extreme weather events, biodiversity loss with ecosystem collapse, and natural resource shortages.
And what's crucial to understand is that water isn't just one item on that list. It is the absolute center of all three. Extreme weather manifests as catastrophic droughts and floods. Ecosystems collapse when their central water source dries up. And the primary natural resource shortage is, undeniably, fresh water.
Which connects directly back to one of the very first classical poetic metaphors we discussed. Justice.
Ah, yes.
I didn't fully grasp it at the beginning, but looking at these projections, it makes perfect sense.
How do you mean?
Well, the text highlights that these ancient poets viewed water as the absolute cornerstone of justice. And they were right, because without baseline, fair access to water, there is no foundation for a just society.
That's a great point.
You cannot have equity, you cannot have education, and you cannot have peace if half your population is dying of thirst or fighting a neighboring country over the damming of a single drying river.
It is the great equalizer.
Exactly.
This is exactly why the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, SDG number 6, is entirely dedicated to ensuring clean water and sanitation for all.
Right.
You cannot secure the prosperity of any future generation without first securing the water they need to physically exist.
Which brings us to the prerequisite for time itself. This is where the deep dive bridges the data back to you, the listener, and back to the poetry.
Yes.
Because solving this requires understanding the concept of umr.
Umr is a beautiful term. It refers to the specific lifespan of a human being.
Okay.
Not time in a cosmic sense, but the very finite, deeply personal stretch of time from your first breath to your last.
And the classical poets deeply understood the connection between umr and water. They constantly likened human life to a flowing river running through a long valley.
And they didn't just do this because rivers look pretty.
No.
They did it because time and water share the exact same physical traits.
Right. They are both transparent, they are both pure in their natural state, and they are both entirely all-encompassing. You are submerged in time the exact same way a fish is submerged in water.
That's a great way to put it.
And most importantly, both are in constant, unstoppable motion. You cannot grasp a handful of river water and hold it perfectly still. It slips through your fingers.
And the poetry capturing this feeling is deeply poignant. One poet writes, "Life is like flowing water. You cannot catch what is past. Look now while you have a moment."
Wow.
It is a stark warning against taking the present moment for granted, in the exact same way we take the running tap for granted.
There's another verse in the research that laments, "My life passed like water. The seas pity me. The rivers cry for my state."
It's a fascinating reversal. Instead of humanity mourning the loss of nature, nature itself is mourning the swift, uncatchable passing of a human life.
But here's where the metaphor hits reality. The poets tell us that philosophically, we can never catch flowing water. Time will always slip away.
Right.
But looking at the modern crisis, we are forced to realize that in a literal, physical sense, we absolutely must figure out how to catch and preserve our water.
We have to.
Because if there is no physical water, how can Umur continue to pass? We cannot let the river run dry or the time stops with it.
Exactly. Ensuring that the lives of future generations can continue to flow smoothly requires aggressive, immediate intervention.
We can't just take shorter showers.
No, we cannot just rely on behavioral changes.
Mm-hmm.
We have to intervene with heavy, sustainable technological innovations. We have to dam the crisis.
And thankfully, the research doesn't just leave us with existential dread. It outlines some of the cutting-edge scientific solutions we are actively developing right now.
Paradigm-shifting technologies.
Yes. Let's talk about graphene filters. I've heard of graphene in the tech sector regarding batteries, but how does it solve the water crisis?
It goes back to that terrifying caveat we discussed earlier, the fact that 96.5% of the world's water is locked in the salty oceans.
Right.
Traditional desalination, boiling the water or forcing it through heavy membranes, takes massive, almost unsustainable amounts of energy.
Because you're basically boiling the ocean.
Exactly. But graphene is a wonder material. It is a lattice of carbon exactly one atom thick.
Just one atom.
One atom. And because it is so unimaginably thin, scientists can engineer microscopic pores into it.
Like a molecular sieve.
Precisely. They create holes that are just large enough for a single H2O molecule to slip through, but entirely too small for the larger salt ions to pass.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It acts like a molecular bouncer at a club, letting the pure water in and kicking the salt out.
A molecular bouncer. I love that.
And because it operates at the atomic level, the energy required to push the water through drops dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
If we can scale this, it effectively turns the oceans into the world's largest drinkable reservoirs.
That is incredible. And for areas that aren't near an ocean, the research highlights atmospheric water generation, basically pulling water out of thin air.
Yeah.
How does that actually work without violating the laws of thermodynamics?
Well, it relies heavily on thermodynamics, actually.
Yeah.
Even in incredibly dry, arid climates, the atmosphere holds humidity. Water is suspended in the air as a gas.
Okay.
These atmospheric generators use specialized materials to pull that air in and cool it below its dew point.
Like condensation.
Exactly. Think of a glass of ice water sitting on a table on a hot summer day. You see beads of sweat form on the outside of the glass.
Right. The glass isn't leaking.
No, it's condensing the invisible moisture from the air into liquid water. These devices do that on an industrial, highly optimized scale.
So we're literally squeezing the sky for a drink.
You really are.
And the third major solution the text explores is biological, using bacteria to purify wastewater.
Yeah, this is known as bioremediation. And it is brilliant because it enlists biology to save biology.
How so?
Well, instead of dumping harsh chemicals into contaminated water to clean it, scientists are cultivating specific strains of microbes.
Oh, okay.
These bacteria have unique metabolic pathways that actually allow them to consume heavy metals, microplastics, and toxic contaminants as food.
They eat it.
They eat the poison, break it down into harmless byproducts, and leave clean water behind.
So we have molecular bouncers, industrial-scale sky squeezers, and microscopic cleaning crews.
It's an arsenal of solutions.
The science is undeniably inspiring. But, it all circles back to the ultimate sobering takeaway of this entire deep dive.
It does.
No matter how advanced our technology gets, there is one undeniable law of physics and economics. You can only save water while you still have it.
You cannot conserve a resource that is entirely vanished.
Right.
The time to implement these graphene filters, to deploy these atmospheric generators, and most importantly, to shift our psychological valuation of water away from the diamond paradox, is right now.
We have to act while the rivers are still flowing.
While we still have the dough to knead, so to speak.
It really is an incredible full circle journey we've taken today. We started by looking at ancient, delicate manuscripts, exploring how classical Turkish, Persian, and Arabic poets viewed water as the literal spiritual foundation of love, justice, and the creation of the soul itself.
We saw how they used the mechanics of fermentation and flow to explain human connection.
Then we confronted the stark modern reality of our biology. The fact that we are walking, talking bodies of water entirely reliant on a tiny 3.5% fraction of the planet's resources.
And finally, we faced the alarming projections of a world running dry, but countered it with the hope of single-atom filtration and bacterial purification.
We did.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final new thought to mull over.
Oh, all right. Let's hear it.
Something that takes the themes of this research and stretches them to the extreme edges of our modern world.
Okay.
We talked extensively today about the water diamond paradox, how we undervalue the essential and overvalue the scarce.
Right. We take the tap for granted.
Consider this.
Mm.
Right now, we have billionaires and massive space agencies spending untold billions of dollars, fortunes, that could revolutionize global water infrastructure, launching rockets into the vacuum of space, desperately trying to find trace amounts of frozen ice on Mars.
Oh, well.
We are spending the wealth of nations to find a single drop of water in the stars, while simultaneously allowing the vast life-giving rivers here on Earth to evaporate and become toxic.
Wow. Yeah.
It is the ultimate tragic manifestation of the water diamond paradox. If we cross the point of no return, and water truly becomes as scarce and as expensive as diamonds, will future poets still write about water as the great flowing equalizer of life?
Or.
Or will they write about it as the ultimate unattainable luxury of the interplanetary rich?
Wow. That is a profoundly haunting question, and definitely something to think about the next time you carelessly leave the tap running while you brush your teeth. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the poetry, the biology, and the future of water. We hope you carry these insights with you. Stay curious.